environmental domains, and they want to become the de facto standard for those environmental domains. And I walk them through the role that OpenAPI plays in this, and that they have to really step up and take all of their data and do the work to standardize it as JSON schema, and then make APIs and publish open APIs and go beyond the kind of automated API publishing I know a lot of these data houses are good at. So we'll see what comes of that. I think in January I'm going to do another follow-up with them, but it was it's about 100 folks across different energy, water, ocean, clean air, that kind of stuff. It was pretty cool. So we'll see where it goes.
Cool.
With that said, we're just going to kick off the API Spec Toolbox here. We've only got a couple folks joining today, but that's all right as we go into the holidays here. API Spec Toolbox is really meant to, generate attention awareness around all the API specifications, most notably OpenAPI, Async API, JSON schema, and we use GitHub here. You can go to the API Specification Toolbox/home. This is where we kind of drive the meetings. Try to keep when the office hours are here, listed here. We use GitHub issues for any kind of ideas and things that we're moving forward. And then we try to publish, as much of it, keep it as much of it out in the open and the process here so that folks can see it. Tend to try to pull together an agenda that, the night before or day before this event. I only got 2 items on today. I am going to kind of pull back a little bit. I would say early on when I started this, it was more of a working session where I got things done, where I seemed to, some folks suggested that, we open it up to the floor and then what people are working on, which I'll still keep as part of it. But I think I want to kind of go back to the working style and get some work done during this session, but getting group commentary on it. And then if we have time, I still got lots of work to do on the OpenAPI projects that I want to propose to the OAI. So I'm kind of a holiday week behind on all that work. But if we have time here. But first, I'll open it up. Frank, do you have anything you want to throw out today, or should I dive into quantifying? Or I guess I'll give it to you too, Neil. I don't want to exclude you from that as well. Anything interesting you're working on?
Porting to Azure API management and realizing they don't have OpenAPI for their APIs, so I'm considering creating a public workspace to make a start on that for them.
That's the greatest sin, it's the cobbler's kids have the worst shoes. API service providers who don't have open APIs for their own APIs is always something I call folks out for. So it's common.
Yes.
Well, cool. I'm going to be diving into the Azure realm probably going into Q1. I'm doing a lot of AWS API deployment and management right now, but the goal is to make it as multi-cloud as possible, and Azure is next on the list. So I might be hitting you up to compare some notes or asking you for an OpenAPI spec along the way.
Yeah, perhaps something we can collaborate on there. One thing I notice, at least in Azure API management, is that there's a bit of a disconnect between Azure API management and the Microsoft identity providers behind the scenes. If you want to do the OAuth dance, you need to have a registration at the identity providers to have your client IDs and secrets, etc. That's not visible to you as a developer through the Azure API management portal. Mm-hmm. So you have to manually orchestrate that process by either hosting your own custom portal or sharing that information out of band with the developers. So it's a bit cumbersome. So there's kind of these gotchas that I think we can also help to make people aware of, so they can accelerate their adoption.
Interesting. I wonder if wonder how much they're aware of it, or if they're just not concerned with it. But yeah, something maybe we can draw some attention to and kind of work out. That whole portal flow, that onboarding flow is so critical, so it's got to be smooth. Well, I will pick your brain when I get back into that. I know the Azure API management. I need to figure out, how trying to figure out how much of it's management versus gateway. Because AWS world is very much gateway, where I think the Azure world, you can gateway a lot of the services, the Azure services, but I still don't quite see it all and understand it all. And then how the pipeline fits in there, I got to figure that piece out too. So I may be hitting you up coming into the new year.
Cool.
With that said, I think the main one that I wanted to focus on today, and kind of shifting back to kind of a working style and get comments as I'm kind of moving along and kind of, I don't know, think out loud while I accomplish some work, is I'm getting a lot of folks, when I talk to large enterprise organizations, they see the potential, like, I can't name some names because they asked me not to, but so the lower levels are doing Swagger or OpenAPI in varying forms, and we're working to kind of harmonize those operations. But this is more leadership going, hey, we know people are using this thing and doing this thing, but and they, we trust that it adds value to the life cycle, but can you help us understand that? And then through that process, they go, well, what's the scope of the OpenAPI community? Like, how big is it? Who's adopted it? And I got like 4 of these questions last week, and I'm just like, oh, it's big. Everyone's doing it. And they're like, yeah, that's great. We love your enthusiasm, but you got any numbers, anything to like share with us? And so I genuinely want to start solving this problem so that I can answer this question and, come up with a set of metrics that I can use to actually quantify the scope of OpenAPI, and then eventually JSON schema and async API are the 3 that I'm most concerned with. But OpenAPI, I would say, is tip of that for me. And so, the numbers that I have is, to start with, is, based upon social media. So basically, you go, okay, well, we got 6,000 followers on Twitter. Oops, let me see. Grab a new notepad. I'm Mr. Notepad. You guys can see in my world here. I'm looking for spots around California to dig for crystals. I like crystals.
Do you want to share your screen?
Oh yeah, thanks. I'm such the king of that. I so depend on you guys for that. Thank you. I had it sharing when I first started. Before I ever got it, I hit record, and then I had to hit reset on all of it. So, all right. And for those of you who didn't get the walkthrough of the how we use GitHub and everything with the screen on, I apologize, but hopefully you can tune in another week and you can see how it works. So anyways, how do we quantify the scope of the OpenAPI spec? Who is involved? And so I'm opening up my notepad here and drag it onto the screen. I'm going to just kind of keep track of some metrics. So Twitter followers is one, like the reach of it, but we got to go back to the core here. So let's go OpenAPI, and what's the member count right now? We're at like 36, 37.
Yeah, right around there, around 37. Yeah, I think technically we have 38, and I just got like one dropping off soon. So yeah, it's right around there. 30. I think we're at something like that. 38.
So I think that's the flagship one that we should be paying attention to.
But obviously, there's a lot of folks who, for whatever reason, don't choose to join, even if they're using this specification, right?
Yeah, so. And I think that's the question, right? Is how do we quantify some of those? And how do we bring them closer in? I think as part of the community.
And there's other organizations like what's the name of that? It's not OpenAPI Travel, which is one of our members. It's IATA, IATA, that I understand their membership uses OpenAPI heavily, and probably a large number of folks there, and a large number of them who are not members of OpenAPI.
Yeah, so trying to figure out like what are these, what are they, and then how do we measure them, down the road. That's, I think, an important one. I think the GitHub repo is another. We've got the OpenAPI specification. So we've got watchers, stars, forks on GitHub. I think, I think issues and folks contributing here, if I could come up with some sort of unique, like, number of unique users who have submitted issues, and then I think all the way getting to what are, who's actually done any sort of contribution. So contribution to issues, I think it would be an interesting spectrum. So I'm going to move this off screen because it's easier. Keep loading it. So issues to contributors, that will kind of give us that spectrum. Folks on Twitter mentioned, people who have deployed Swagger UI, which is a difficult one to quantify. I would say, this is where we gotta, at the GitHub level, we could pick a handful of the tooling, and do the same as we did for the spec repo for some of these tooling, and see who, these are pretty prominent tools. OpenAPI tools, Redoc, we'll use APIs Guru. But I would say Swagger UI, then I gotta figure out the diff between, the OpenAPI and the Swagger community. And I think Swagger UI is really the oldest artifact out there. I would say it's even older than the repo, because this is the original reason why people do Swagger and OpenAPI for docs. So Redoc kind of represents, I would say, the new generation, and Swagger UI represents the older generation. But this is still applicable. So grabbing the watchers, stars, forks, issues down to who's contributed in any way. Oh, used by, look at this. Interesting. Interesting. But similar to, so I add this to the mix. That's interesting. Used by. Is this on the? So this is, because this is code. It wouldn't be on the spec. This is actual code. Who's using this code? So like all of these, though, I mean, I can pull all this data via the GitHub API and/or interface, but quantifying, like, all right, who is someone? Who becomes a point saying, someone's using it. We got 30,000 people here, so I got to figure out how to quantify this, because we've got several data points. We've got watchers, we've got stars, we've got forks, we've got contributors, we've got issue submitters, we got people who are using it now. And this isn't a core, this is a tool. This isn't actually OpenAPI, but it does quantify, I think, people who are using it. Interesting. So I gotta kind of process this and think about this. I think, which tools do I include? How deep do I go down this rabbit hole? And then how do I kind of quantify that scope of usage? But I would say, I want to try to come up with a way of uniquely identifying someone who's falls under several buckets. Like, if they're a Twitter follower and a dependency user, is that like 2 points? And how do I figure that out? I don't know. Interesting. So
it's a deep hole.
Yeah, and at some point, I mean, with all of this stuff, I just got to figure out, like, where can I do something and quantify something to get folks thinking. And then there's, I would say, coming up with the second version of this that's like, hey, this is the member list, but here's the brands that are using it, and the other part that I want to go down is I use Bing as a search for this, because you can do this via the API and quantify it through the API. and trying to validate. So I have a list of, thousands of tech companies in a database, and so when it's interesting that WSO2's top ad for Bing, that's interesting. But trying to understand, has someone talked about their usage of OpenAPI on their blog, on their site? So if you search for a company name, plus OpenAPI, if the top like 5 URLs in a search results are that company's domain, I think that's a strong vote that they're on board. And maybe not the top 5, maybe just the top 1, if I can, or 1 or 2. If I can get the first one is something they've said about OpenAPI in their domain, then that's a fairly strong vote that they're someone on board with what's going on. And of course, I've got to weigh that with Swagger. Let's see where Postman, that's interesting. So let's take another one. Let's go Twitter. Oh, Twitter's not going to work. Let's pick another, because this is how I can usually find. So here's Swagger UI, Expedia. Oh, you gotta sign in now? Oh no, thanks. Just take me to Swagger UI. So, this is what I'm looking for is Swagger UI under a company's domain name, to be able to then say, okay, because associated with this domain name, I have this logo in a database. So if I can programmatically get a hit for Swagger UI within their domain name, that's one automated search or automated score that I have to be able to say Expedia has adopted this. And so it's not like we're looking for a valid member list like this, but I want to just be able to have a point and then a URL to kind of support it as provenance for that they're on board. And using it, I've played with, because I ingest a lot of open APIs, and you can search for this Swagger UI in Bing search. Now you don't get a whole lot, or you get you get a lot of them that you have to paginate through, and they kind of become meaningless when you just search for that. But if you search for company name plus Swagger UI, or topic like product, image, video, and Swagger UI, it pulls up quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is, here I have a workspace for the API spec toolbox here, where I have APIs for the service providers, people, and tooling, those projects that we're doing. But I'm going to add a collection that will pull from the Bing search and work from a directory of service providers. So it'll basically use this list to validate people are actually using it in some way, and then come up and give everyone a point. And then I'll just keep adding companies to that list, and then validate or invalidate them, and have a vote. The goal would then be is, okay, because with each of these service providers, I have Alexa ranking behind each service provider. So I have probably 50,000 companies in this list. I've only outputted, I think, like 1,500 for this API. But I will run the full 50,000 against that, and then come up with some sort of, hey, here's the top, here's the long tail of who's using OpenAPI, and then here's the kind of cream on the top of that. The Expedia is based upon their Alexa ranking, because I have their domain, I have their Alexa ranking, I have their usage of Swagger UI. And then if I can come up with multiple points, I'll say, like, here's the ones we really should be targeting and thinking about getting on as members, or getting on as some part of the community, because they're not only using Swagger UI or Redoc, they're also talking about it on their blog. They also follow us on Twitter, and they've also commented or watched the GitHub repo. I think that crosswalk is going to be a lot harder to pull together, but I think over time we'll be able to pull that together. But my first goal is to just how many companies by domain are using it, to kind of quantify that, And then at some point I'll come up with kind of leaderboard and the cream on the top of that. So any other things off the top of your guys' head? So GitHub, Twitter, member list, just raw search for usage of docs. Trying to think how else people use it.
You could look at Nugget packages and stuff that generate OpenAPI or Swagger, as it's still called in the Nugget space. But if you looked even at like nugget.org for
Nugget.org.
InSwag.
Nugget.
Yeah, Nugget and InSwag.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Well, let's start with
There's like 10 million downloads or something like that.
yeah. So 390 packages, yeah. Oh yeah. Adding to my list here. This is good. What was the other one you said? Nugget and what? Was there another one?
InSwag. So if you
InSwag.
look here for the InSwag,
And swag like that?
without the I, just the N.
Just in. Okay, yeah. Well, I'm gonna dive into this because so what kind of API do they have? Yeah. Programmatically, how I can get at this. I'll figure it out. But yeah, just understanding, I would say, the package dependency and the tooling. I think that's definitely a quick way to see who's, that's a vote, you know, an important vote is these dependency graph.
Yeah. Often some of these are coming at it from very much from a code first perspective as well, and then looking to generate the OpenAPI docs
Yeah.
as a result.
Yeah, well, and the goal is the profile behind any of these, you know, someone that's verifiable, like works for a company or anything, like, so I want to be able to verify the brand, you know, like here's a brand, and being able to tell if someone's a person or a brand, and then if that person works at a brand, that's always the trick is trying to get that, like how do we say this is a company and associated with a company is always my goal. So how do we do that here? It would be the key. Like their image there. That's what it is on Swag, I see. So yeah. Interesting. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, so lots to pull. And again, like all the projects on our list, I would say there's what can we do now, what can we do later, what can other people chime in to do and help with, I think is really the goal here. So I'm going to try to get some initial numbers, seed it up as a project, start answering some questions, but then like I'm doing with the other projects I want to propose to the OAI is try to carve out and define, well, what are the next steps of work so that someone else can either do it and or the OAI can help guide that work. So interesting. Okay. Well, what other social media? So is there much with OpenAPI on YouTube?
We just created an OpenAPI YouTube channel for the latest API specifications conference, and we plan to continue to use it, but we just opened that up.
Oops. So yeah, so I would say go away. The ask, I think, is an important kind of vein of this is who's around the event, who's supporting that. I think those are brands. That's an extra point or metric I want to track. So okay. And then also I'm looking at how do I translate this to async, and then JSON schema is definitely going to be top of my list. But then, you know, once I think refining this and cultivating this is where it's going to become the most meaningful. Is like I can say, oh, OpenAPI's got X amount of Twitter followers, X amount of GitHub folks across these top projects. here's the kind of package dependency, here's the people who are dependent on the top tools. And this really gets to why I would say this tooling service provider and open source tooling directories are so important, is because without them we can't quantify the landscape. Like I can't quantify without knowing who are all the OpenAPI tools, and so without this list, it's hard to do a lot of this quantification, because it's this list of tools that I'm going to use to automate the Bing searches and everything. So having this stuff as somewhat rated, and then have the URLs and the names and stuff for them so that we can search, because like Fast API, that's a pretty prominent one. But at some point I'm going to have to cut off and say, well, Fast API is just using it for docs. Does that really, if someone's using Fast API and publishing docs, are they really an OpenAPI user? It's like they're just using a feature of this. So I'll probably start cutting the edge, trimming the edges there, and saying, no, that's not one we should do.
So a couple other things. One is we do have a LinkedIn page. We don't use it super heavily, but we do use it. So you might want to include that as a possibility. And I don't know if you're familiar with a metric called share of voice. I think the idea of share of voice, do you know about that in social media, that metric? The idea of share of voice is that you compare, your footprint of how much attention you're getting compared to other similar types of initiatives in your space. So I don't know exactly how we would do it, but we have some of that expertise at Linux Foundation. So perhaps get some pointers on it. Yeah,
and that's kind of what I'm trying to hope to do when I reach async and JSON schema, is have some of that kind of defined for OpenAPI, and then we can use that metric for the others, like with the OpenAPI as the kind of base. So it's like OpenAPI is X big, like how do we size up async API against that, I think is a big one. But no, I'd like to learn more about that. That's a new one to me.
Yeah, I don't know how it's measured. I just have seen it reported out in other projects. It's like we have such and such percent share of share of voice, and here's who we're measuring against.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty critical one moving forward, trying to quantify what the reach is. I mean, as we go into these industry organizations, the healthcare, the environment with the UN, the airline, travel, and the banking, like as we approach more executives that are like, the lower level folks are like, yes, we use OpenAPI, yes, we need it, yes, it's critical to the whole thing, and yes, we should standardize for our industry. I think getting executives, being able to show them a one sheet that shows them the scope of not just these members, but this scope. I mean, it's essential to what Expedia does. This is critical. So how do we quantify that in a 1 or 2 sheet or 1 or 2 slide deck, slides in the deck? So that's really where I want to get with this, because they're never going to wade through all of this to understand it. We've got to come up with this version of this, to tell them. And there's other things like, I don't know whatever happened with the Dutch government adopting OpenAPI. That was a big thing for a while, and we never.
I'd heard about that, and I don't know if we should reach out to them, or who would be a good contact.
Dimitri.
We sometimes get people reaching out to us and nonprofits, and sometimes for whatever reason, they seem like they're heading down the path of adopting, but they, for whatever reason, even though there's no cost to join, that may not be a priority for them.
And I think Dimitri. I remember when he did this. So yeah, I mean, I think some of this is just part of the follow up on the conversation, and go, yeah, this is in place, and yeah, it's being used, but it's quiet, and no one's telling any stories about it. Where we just need to get, the Dutch government on a page of government, saying, hey, we have, the UK government's on board, the Dutch government's on board, like who else, And so I think we just got to get better at quantifying those and putting them into buckets, putting a logo and making a visual, that represents it. So, and again, this all goes back to having an API for this, that if we can't rapidly maintain this via an API and then publish it out of an API, I think it'll never be kept up to date. So
any opportunity to get the members listed here to provide some anonymous data feeds? say roughly how many of their customers are at least onboarding APIs into their gateways using an OpenAPI specification?
Yeah, no, that's an important question. This was always like, if you back in the day, Apiary, Jacob from Apiary, before he sold to Oracle, the programmable web graph is always like the used as the metric. It's the hockey stick chart everyone references in their slides for the growth and adoption of APIs, which is, Jacob always would say, oh, that's total BS, because, like they say it's at 20,000, and like we have 120,000 customers, and I'm like, well, publish those numbers, share those numbers. So getting companies to do that is tough. But I think if we could have a kind of united front and a campaign to reach out and go, okay, IBM, help us quantify this as a member, like what's the impact of OpenAPI across your platform, which services use it, and then how many, what's the scope of usage of that. And I don't think you're going to get a lot of them. Some of them get nervous because they don't have any usage, and they don't want to share that, and that's competitive knowledge. But how do we scope that, I think, is an important one. Sorry, I'm keeping notes.
It's also possible that some of our members have some of the knowledge to give us some direction on how to gather metrics, like maybe Bloomberg does, for example. I don't know, but yeah. I mean, you would think that they might.
Well, I think asking them is the first important step, right?
Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's part of this outreach that, and this is why, back to the projects that are on the table, is they all kind of overlap. Is like, quantifying who the members are and who the service providers are will feed into this list. And then our member retention, like how do we go, keep asking these folks, which I've been working on, like reaching out and go, what do you need? Talking to the Tyke folks and going, hey, what do you expect? What do you want from membership? What do you, what's going to help you? And make that part of the conversation is going, help us quantify, help us justify that money you spend as membership, by sharing some numbers with us. Or how do we quantify it? So I will keep asking. All right. I think that's a pretty good start for that. I think Twitter, GitHub, I think some general Bing searches and package dependency. But then I think some good old fashioned just kind of research, because I out of my mind there's a few of these big ones like country adoption, and I know there's some in Australia. I think the Victorian province has adopted and has some policies. This is a kind of a separate one, like which government agencies have put it in their policies, and of course which ones have actually joined and are part of that. So I think that layer needs to be quantified, because that's a pretty key one, an entire government body adopting it.
Yeah, recently we had outreach from World Customs Organization, and they're sort of heading in the direction of they're writing white papers and thinking about their strategy and may end up adopting OpenAPI, so it's one to keep an eye on. So yeah, we get some interesting ones out there, government organizations and nonprofits that are broadly adopted.
Well, and I think the European Commission stuff that came out of recently, that report, I'd be curious. Oh, interesting. So this is why I endlessly find searching for combo of names, plus OpenAPI is pretty important to do, because I find new APIs that are fascinating. So there's an OpenAPI here, so European Data Portal, so starting to find these and search for these and then build out relationships, here I think are, and this as a reference, is like, all right, the EU is using us. This is a pretty strong reference, and just finding those, but I find those by having this dictionary vocabulary of these entities, and this is how I find open APIs and actually ingest them and find new APIs.
Mm.
But you can't always rely on the search, because open API is tough, because sometimes the search isn't actually the open API spec. So I always need that kind of second verification of, yeah, interesting. So sometimes it just really takes a human going, and I build that's why I have these lists of the businesses and companies and tools, is then I can create like a list where I don't have to type this. I just click on a link and it loads this Google search. I look as a human at the top two and go, yeah, there's probably not a lot of strong World Health Organization, because it's, as soon as if you get past the first couple and it's saying must include OpenAPI, it's not really a strong candidate. But doing this across different orgs is pretty key. So see, we have the first results has must include OpenAPI. So this is a pretty strong that there is no current UN adoption. But if I do that, you start, okay, well, no. Oh, so it's ArcGIS. So it's just, yeah, interesting. So some of this really takes a human going through and trying to figure out, and find these references, and then be able to weight these, to be able to know that the United Nations is so important. So yeah, it's another project on the table. I'll just get it fleshed out and then start incrementally moving it forward along with the other projects. But that's kind of what I wanted to throw on the table today and just get your thoughts. I'm glad you were here, Neil, because this helps me think through, just the member list and the other things. But and Frank, thank you for the package kind of dependency management, because I wouldn't have gone that far down that rabbit hole. So let me just pull together as its own standalone project, try to give it some legs, and try to start quantifying these and pulling data, because trying to understand what is the scope of Whomlicks and what's their scope of adoption in a programmatic way is not easy. And so trying to harvest Twitter users and understand the scope of some of these. Are they just watchers, fence sitters, or are they actually part of a company that's actually doing something? That's and a company that has a logo that we can put on and say this is a point, because I don't think we want to count people doing things with it. We want to count brands and companies and domains doing it, and that's eventually something we can get a logo next to, and that's really the goal, I would say. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, all right, well, I'm going to stand this up as a project. I'm going to flesh it out and give it kind of its own legs, and then add it to the list. I don't think I have anything more really on the projects that I got to do. I just got to take each one and flesh out, per the last conversation with you, Neil, and Ole, is just come up with like, all right, here's the project scope, here's the work that needs to be done, and then try to scope out like what is a certain amount of work that can be done by the community to move this forward, and then is this something that the OAI can provide oversight for and help herd cats in the community, or is it actually something we can then hire someone? I want to lean towards the former, where the OAI is more time and people to project management rather than actually doing or paying for the work. But I will also come to the point where I'll make some proposals that, hey, if we could find a contractor to do some of this, then that would be good. So.
Well, we definitely need increased participation in the community, I would say. We have some people that I worry about them burning out, and so maybe having some small specific activities like that will start to make people feel engaged, and then maybe we can recruit them over to some other areas. Like we have marketing. We really need some help on our marketing group, for example.
Yeah, that's that finding of new blood, I think, is pretty key to this, and I think that's where I would like to really try to get you, and then if we can move forward where we can get to hire a part or full-time people to help just help execute on those tasks of works. And that's kind of what I've got to figure out now, is I don't know if GitHub Issues is the right place for for the pieces of work. If we're moving forward, the newsletter, should the work that needs to happen live here, or should we come up with a more easier to use task management? Probably that, because GitHub is pretty intimidating to a lot of folks. But if it's literally like, hey, we need 5 service providers profiled, and then here's what profiling means: is you go find a name, a description, a logo, and a handful of things. Here's what profiling means, and here's 5 companies that need it. That's a nice bite-sized chunk that someone can understand, but we've got to create that task and have that on a task list in a queue somewhere. And then I think the OAI can come in and go, when I find new people that we want to energize and go, hey, we could really use help in this area, the OAI can help check in with them and follow up with them. Hey, were you able to accomplish these tasks? Or no, hey, that's great, that's fine, don't stress out, we understand you're busy, but hey, let us know by this date if you don't, because we're going to put it back in the queue. And then if you do it and you're like super energetic, the OAI can be like, hey, have you, you should join in on the marketing conversation. We could use your energy here, we could use you here. And then, so how do we use these tasks, I think, on the outside to kind of energize people and bring them in, either as members or, actually helping on, reduce burnout on some of these groups. So hey, Jeremy, by the way, didn't say hi. So that's where I'm at with the projects. I'm going to carve out some rest of the day. Today is my OpenAPI day, and I'm going to spend some time on the projects, what I promised you, Neil, because the step that I want to have the project list. I have the project list. I want to have them fleshed out, just another step, and then I was going to present to Steve and to Marsh and to everybody, that kind of core group, and say, hey, these are the projects, here's the work that needs to be done. And then I'm going to start going through that list of people and finding some people to do the work, but then simultaneously come back to you, Neil, and figure out, well, what can we do from the OAI side. And I think, in other areas, with the shifts in the board right now, and then if we can continue moving forward in the new year, maybe looking at hiring and augmenting you. But I want to have what that task list, or what that ask would be of that person before we go down that road. Like, what do we need them doing project management wise, and really, be sure that's something that you can't do, and we need it. But that would be good to go into the new year with kind of a plan for maybe hiring someone to help herd these cats and bring on more people and energize more people, because that's really what I would like to see doing, is out of this list of people that we're finding and engaging with as part of the spec toolbox, is I want to keep bringing in fresh energy, bring in the Taylors of the world that have energy, have time, have the expertise, but maybe don't have a lot of experience doing this, and how we bring them in and show them that they're making a difference and get them revved up as an OAI passionate person, and kind of widen that horizon of people, so we're not all burning out on these efforts. So anywho, that's going to be my rest of my work today, is working on these projects and then try to get the core group presentation and then talk with you, Neil. But I'm guessing as we go into the holidays, I don't even know what the calendar looks like yet. How many more weeks we got here in December before everyone shuts down? Yeah.
It's coming up fast.
Jeez. Yeah, I'll have probably something for you next week, just kind of on the project list. But I did want to talk to Isabel. I got a call with Isabel next week, and with Steve next week, and then I'll reach out to Marsh and probably Daryl, and then Taylor, and kind of the core group on the projects. But so I'll probably hit you up next week, Neil, probably the same time,
okay,
on the 11th, with some project lists and talk some more about that. But until then,
I'm gonna not be able to attend this meeting on the 11th, by the way, just in case you were planning on using this time for that. Just
Yeah.
FYI, I have a conflict.
No, understood. Appreciate that. I'll hit you up. Otherwise, I'll just probably do it in email, and then we can asynchronously or find some time if needed. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's all I got today. Anybody else got anything? How you doing, Jeremy? Holding up?
All right, just coming back from parental leave, so sorry for being less attentive for the last few weeks. But it's been good to see things progressing in GitHub. What I want to do is just check out the projects that are there and start to support one or two of them if they relate to anything we've talked about in the past. Hoping to get back involved.
No worries. I have pretty low expectations throughout the holidays here of anyone showing up. So appreciate you just being here at all. But yeah, that's kind of the next step for the project, is to get some more bite-sized tasks that people can actually accomplish without much, on ramping and cognitive load to get them going. So I'll ping you once this group. But by next week, I think we'll have a few of those. I just got to figure out how to surface them on the README on the main page so people know here's a project, here's a task that needs to be done, and I'm kind of flailing at that, doing that coherently right now. So. Anyways, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your guys' weekend, and I will see you guys next week, and I'll see you online.
Okay, you too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.